So you've got your first bookkeeping client, but what actually is involved end to end in delivering a bookkeeping service? In this video, we're going to take you through exactly the steps that you follow as a bookkeeper when you're working with small businesses.
Welcome to the Bookkeepers Podcast, sponsored by Xero.
So this is a slightly different episode to the episodes we usually put out. We often have bookkeepers in our community who are new to bookkeeping, and maybe people have been listening to the podcast for a long time thinking they'd like to become a bookkeeper working from home, but they don't know exactly what is involved in delivering the service. I mean, I didn't know, like going into having my first clients or just thinking about how do I move from being an accountant in industry into a bookkeeping role, having not worked in practice, I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like.
Yeah, and usually on the podcast we talk about the journey from qualification to building a business and then growing a business. But we obviously have a lot of people that are watching that are being a bit nosy and like scoping out what are my options if I wanted to build a business from home. And I wanted flexibility, and I wanted something that is going to make me feel good and feel like I've got a proper profession. So we have lots of people lurking around asking these questions, and we've never really answered it in this way. So we thought we'd dive in because a lot of our audience are already qualified. But obviously, everyone has to start somewhere, and what kind of makes you think that this is going to be a good thing for you? You need to understand what it is, and I don't think everybody always does know what it is at the beginning.
No. So we're going to go through step by step from the actions that you're going to be taking with your client, where you do that piece of work, why you're doing that, why it's important for the bookkeeping and the accounting element, but also why that's important for the small business owner.
Yes.
Let's start with what bookkeeping is, because the way I see it, your role as a bookkeeper is to make sure that you are recording the income and expenditure for the client so that you can give the client information about how their business is doing so that they can make decisions, and also so that you can file necessary reports, make sure the client is paying the right taxes at the end of the year.
Yes.
I think so often we're leading with do a tax return, but so much more than that. It's
about recording the income that's coming in, where it's coming from, where are these sales generated, and then where are the expenses, where are you spending your money, and then what's left, the profit. And then the tax is from the profit. And if you don't know what profit you're making, I mean, why are you in business? Yeah. But so many times people assume bookkeepers and accountants are there as a servant of HMRC.
Yeah.
Whereas it's very much a servant of the business owner to help them run a profitable business and make sure that they are compliant.
Yeah. So we make sure that we're recording these transactions in these days in a piece of software. You might come across clients who either haven't got any records, or they are using a spreadsheet, or maybe they're using some kind of desktop software. We recommend that bookkeepers today try and get all of their clients onto cloud-based software.
100%.
For lots of reasons, not just because, we've seen how much this has advanced over the last few years, but also because they need to have good visibility. They need to be able to access this from anywhere. We want to be able to access this from anywhere.
Yes.
And it usually connects to HMRC systems in some way if they're filing anything.
Yeah, and it connects with the banks as well. So you have bank feeds. I mean, we are old enough that we have been through the non-cloud version of bookkeeping, and it is night and day. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad in a way that I experienced the very manual element of doing things, because now I appreciate what we have got in the palm of our hands with cloud. But yeah, it's about timely, accurate information for the business owner, and cloud definitely gets you to that goal quicker than any other method.
Yeah, because you can see what happened today or yesterday,
yes,
there and then on the screen.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the softwares. We're obviously based in the UK, so software that is in our world, obviously Xero, sponsor of the Bookkeepers Podcast. We're big fans of Xero. Also there's Sage, FreeAgent, QuickBooks, And I think ultimately what we're trying to achieve is make sure that the client is on the cloud, that they have the functionality they need for their business. And I think it can be quite a personal choice. I know as a practice owner, you chose to be Xero only.
Yeah.
I use Xero. I had some clients on QuickBooks. I had FreeAgent clients as well. And in fact, I had a Sage client as well. So I think I was very much like, how does the client need this to work for them? But it's important to have that conversation with the client in terms of, is the software you're using right now actually serving you?
Yeah.
Is it going to give you the reporting and the insights that you need to make the decisions?
And it's like anything, you know, we all know there are so many softwares out there, and you can't be an expert in all of them and keep up to date with all of the latest releases and upgrades. So I highly recommend becoming like the expert in one of them, because it helps you to really get to know that software and leverage your time, and then become an expert in that software for your client. So I decided, you know, with Xero, that was going to be the one that I used. And if someone came to me and was on another software, I gave them the option. They could either, you know, we could convert all of their data over to Xero, or I could give them a recommendation for an expert with the software that they were using.
And sometimes you'll find they outgrow a piece of software, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, software, they will tell you who they've been made for, the kind of client that they're for, you know. And we are talking about, you know, SMEs. We're not talking about very large corporates that may need something else. We're talking about this kind of smaller, you know, maybe under the 10 million kind of business that you know, doesn't have thousands of members of staff. This is the kind of where bookkeepers really shine, because when you get to the bigger side, you'll have a finance department and you'll have full-time employees in the finance department. What we're doing as a bookkeeper, as a virtual bookkeeper, or as somebody that's supporting SMEs, which are small, medium-sized enterprises, we are supporting them and acting as an outsourced finance function. We're still doing everything that a finance department in a large firm would be doing, but obviously it is not always a full-time job, or they don't have the capacity space in their offices for someone to be there in the office all the time. And because of cloud and because of software and because of automation, it can be done quicker and smarter with systems and processes.
Yeah, I think there's a really important distinction between the small and medium enterprises we're speaking about, actually. And you mentioned how software is built for a particular type of client. Just like we talk to bookkeepers about having an ideal client, software will as well.
Yes.
FreeAgent, for example, serve the UK market only.
Yes.
And I think, personally, I think FreeAgent is a brilliant solution for sole traders.
Yes.
But if they went on to incorporate their business, I might suggest that they move to another piece of software. So I think that understanding, even from your practice's point of view, what kind of clients you're supporting, and depending on the size of them, which software you'd recommend, or based on the kind of activities that the client has or the reporting they need. Like, do they need to slice and dice that information by location or projects, or do they have lots of fixed assets, or, you know, are they online? Different software is going to work better for different types of clients.
100%. So that again comes back to knowing that when you start a bookkeeping practice, you get to choose the client you work with, and you can design a practice that will look very different to everybody else's. So I think a lot of people think, why do we tell everybody the secrets of running this business? Because then everyone's going to copy everyone and everyone's going to end up being the same. But there are so many different types of businesses out there that need a different service. So we're not in competition. We are here to help and support the economy.
You mentioned a few times about connecting the bank account. So when we talk about the work that we're doing for a client, a lot of information is going to stem from transactions going through the bank.
Yes.
Now, let's be honest, there are going to be business owners who don't pay for everything out of their business bank account. And from time to time, you're going to have to do that thing where you're like, you've given me this receipt for something that looks business related, but I can't find that transaction.
Yeah.
So we've got a job to make sure that the bank account in the software is reflecting transactions that are only for the business, so they can't be paying for their food shopping on their business card.
Yeah.
But also the transactions that have not gone through the bank account because either they've been funded by a director or there's something else that's happening outside of the business, or because they're accounting adjustments that we need to make as well. So we need to make sure that the accounts reflect all of that. And I always feel that the starting point is the bank statement.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place to start. You need to make sure you have access to every bank account, every business credit card, every way that, you know, the money is flowing in and out of this business. And there's opportunities here for bookkeepers to help business owners to understand why it's really important to keep everything in one place. And if it's not working, for example, if you have a director that's always putting something on their personal card, maybe you can talk to them about expense cards and ways that they can still access the money but streamlines it just for business expenses rather than you having to figure out whether the cinema trip was actually a business expense, that kind of thing, you know. So because as a bookkeeper, we know what is wholly and exclusively for business purposes and why it's important to have it separate from personal. But business owners don't necessarily know that. And we can't assume that they know that. So if you do have a client that is mixing and muddling all of these expenses up and it's making your life hard, one of your jobs is to explain the importance of keeping everything separate and help them to achieve that goal.
You've said to me before that your role is kind of being a detective.
Yes.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
What is this? What are you doing that needs you to spend this money?
Yeah, and not assuming that everything is exactly how it looks like, or thinking, oh, that's exactly the same always. You know, sometimes you know, we need to ask questions, and I think this is something that people don't realize that what bookkeepers do. I think people assume bookkeepers are quiet, are behind the computer, and don't necessarily have a lot of, you know, chat with their clients. That is where we're going to be going wrong. In a world of automation and AI, we need to be talking and asking questions.
And also from an AML point of view, you know, you are the person so anti-money laundering regulations.
Yeah.
As a bookkeeper, you are like the first line of defense. You can see if something's going through the accounts that does not look right, it is your job to report that. So we need to ask questions to understand transactions from that point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that changed. I mean, that wasn't always the case. When I started in this career, anti-money laundering wasn't something that bookkeepers were responsible for, but it came in that accountancy service providers are, you know, have to be on the lookout for things, you know, we're the first line of defence against any like tax evasion and fraud and things like that, because we are seeing these numbers. So that's something else that I don't think everyone always realises when they come into this profession, that there is that element to it.
And if you're quiet and you just nod along and are almost like intimidated by the director who says, oh, you know, it is business, just put it through, this is the kind of place that you could slip up.
Exactly.
So we need to make sure that transactions in the bank account, which are reflected in the software, so that the software is a mirror of the bank statement. We need to make sure that each transaction there has some paperwork and we understand what that transaction is so we can record it appropriately in the accounts, whether it's a income line, an expense line, an asset, a liability. We need to make sure we're recording it appropriately. We also need to chase paperwork for
evidence.
Yeah.
Evidence.
Oh, you're such an auditor.
Yeah, you need the evidence. You need to match. This is our job, is to say this is what's happened and here's the supporting documentation to prove that this has happened. But also, if your businesses that you're working for are VAT registered, you need to record the VAT and have the evidence to say we're claiming this VAT back.
Then, once you've recorded all the transactions, coded them, got the evidence, you're going to be making sure that the balance on the bank statement, so that the money they now have, which is either an asset or a liability if they're overdrawn, agrees to the actual physical bank statement.
Yes.
If it doesn't, there's some money that hasn't been recorded somewhere.
Yeah, and it's your job to close that gap and make sure all the ins and all the outs have matched up, they've got supporting evidence, you've recorded every item to a correct category, which is a part of the chart of accounts. You've allocated it to the correct category, and the VAT is recorded as well. So when people say, "Oh, you just upload something, or you just do this and you just do that," there are many elements to it, but you're also looking of, is this wholly and exclusively for business? So there's a lot of points that every piece of paper has a lot of things you need to think about.
Mm-hmm. And this is the problem with clients thinking they can do their own bookkeeping. And yes, some of them can, and they do have the skills and the knowledge to be able to do that. But there are plenty of business owners who watch TV ads that say you can do everything yourself, and they're like, oh, great, I can do everything myself. And if they don't understand those intricacies, there's going to be some kind of problem in the future.
Because as well, you might have something, an invoice for maybe insurance, and maybe you're paying the whole year up front. So then you have to do an adjustment called a prepayment, because if you're recording something all in 1 month on one date, but it relates to the whole year, then that month's management accounts are going to show a really big expense of insurance in this month, and the profit's going to be really low, but that isn't actually what's happening. That expense needs to be apportioned across the whole year. So you have to do adjustments to make sure the correct amount of insurance is going in each correct month that it's relevant to.
Nice. Once we've got up to date with our bank statement, we've made any adjustments for transactions that don't belong in that month, etc., we're also going to help our client sort of in the moment or during that week or month with invoicing in the future, or recording sales. And they could have sales from all different places. It depends what type of business they are. So they might be a business that invoices their clients.
Yeah, like a traditional business that raises an invoice, says, this is what we're doing for you. You need to pay in so many days.
Yeah. And they might raise their own invoices, or they might ask you to raise their invoices. That's going to be something depending on what their systems are. Your role is potentially to raise the invoices, check they're coded properly to the right sales line. If there's VAT, account for the VAT, but also to do credit control.
Yeah, because once you raise that invoice and it's out there and that customer has received it, they then owe the money. And your job as a bookkeeper could be one of the elements. You may not do credit control, but you could potentially help the business to make sure that invoice is being paid on time and the money is in the bank, because otherwise it sits there and it becomes an old debt and it's harder to chase and get. But really, everyone's in business to make money and have a profit. And if you're recording sales that haven't actually hit the bank account, the money's not there, then that's not good for the business. So bookkeepers very often get involved in credit control.
Yeah. But they might get their sales in other formats. They might have a till if they're a shop, and you might have a job to go and support them with like reconciling their till. But they're going to probably give you like a read at the end of the day where you're going to use that as a record of what's gone in and out, and there'll be some kind of cash float.
Yes.
You might have online sales. So you might be dealing with transactions dropping into the bank feed, which are coming from Stripe or PayPal, because the customer is buying online through some kind of online store, but that payment is being taken by a payment provider who is then deducting a commission or a transaction fee and then dropping the remaining amount into the account. And I think so often there's this sort of mistake of, that's just sales, but actually it's not, because you need to gross it up to add back the transaction fee.
Yeah, the transaction fee. Yeah, these are all the little things. You think, my Stripe feed is feeding in to my bank account and it's all there, so that's easy. It's just that £50 or whatever coming in, but it's mostly £55 of sales, £5 of fees, and you're left with the £50. And it's those kind of things that it messes clients' accounts up because they haven't recorded that transaction in its entirety.
Yeah. And that's why we advocate so much for having an ideal client, because if you were dealing with service providers who invoice, or if you were dealing with online businesses who take their payments through Stripe, you're going to become a specialist at one of those things. But we can't always become specialists at everything, or we can't become specialists at everything.
No.
We are better to focus in on doing one thing really well and getting known for that.
Yeah, and it's a bit like, Etsy sales or being an Uber driver or all of these different, or a black cab driver, something like that. All of these areas, they're going to have they'll have special ways of being paid. Maybe they've signed up to some kind of app and they get a part of that, but they have to pay a monthly fee, or or there's cash that's being dealt with. There are so many different ways. So this is why having this ideal client really helps you to systemize how you're going to look after your clients.
Yeah. Okay, let's think about the other side of this, so the expense side. So we've already spoken about the receipts, the transactions going through the bank account, the bits they're spending at a shop maybe. But there's also going to be transactions going through the bank where we're paying suppliers for things. So they might be paying for things like their rent or some kind of stock that they're buying, or it might be an asset that they're purchasing or a loan repayment. So they're going to be all of these transactions that are going through as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to ask the client for the paperwork. It might be a receipt, or it might be a purchase invoice.
Yes.
Or something else.
Yeah. Or an purchase order as well, or a pro forma invoice. There are so many ways that people can say you need to pay us this. Yes, obviously there's lots of ways that you just pay on the card, pay on online payments, all of that. So there might be lots of transactions that you're dealing with that have already come through the bank. But then there are a lot of invoices that need paying, and bookkeepers can help with running payment runs, and supplier payments can be automated into some kind of, a regular thing. Maybe it's once a week on a Friday, you pay everyone that's due at that point. But because every supplier might have different terms. Some of them may give you 60 days to pay. Some might give you 7 days. So this is why you need to enter every invoice into the system correctly with the due date and produce reports that say this is what's due and upcoming. And you can help the business owner to get into a flow so that it helps with their cash flow rather than just paying on the day that every one of them is due individually and just going into the bank like every day and doing a bit here and a bit here. We advocate for like a nice payment run kind of like a cycle, cycle.
Yeah, I think, I can remember having like bank mandates and having to go like be on the client's bank and then log in as them and make all the payments.
Yeah.
That isn't ideal. I don't think it's ideal at all. And there are lots of great solutions now where you can give people, for example, Apron have an expense card. So it might be that if there are people in the team who are paying for things, you give them a card so that can help manage payments and give like real visibility to the business owner, and also limits on what people can spend. But also where you can use things like Apron payments so that you can make a list of those transactions that need to be paid and you can pay them all in one go.
Yeah, so you can create pay cycles and you can tick ones which the date's going to be paid and kind of set it up. And the nice thing is you can set it up to be approved by a director in the business. So you're that one step removed. You're not going into the bank. It's linked to the bank. The payment will come out the bank, but somebody that's in the business approves it and sends that payment. You're just setting it up ready for them to review.
And I think this is the beauty of really understanding your clients and the problems they have, because you can suggest solutions like this that your client may not know about.
No, they're not going to know.
No. So the other big thing I always think about when I think about who we're paying is payroll.
Oh, yeah.
As a bookkeeper, you might be running payroll if your clients have a team. So you will be maybe receiving a timesheet from them with some information about their pay. Maybe they get a bonus, or you've got to calculate their holiday entitlement, or they've got a pension contribution. You might be producing that whole pay run.
Yeah. So payroll, does often sit under the umbrella of, bookkeeping services, but it is a whole nother skill set. And so for me, I decided to always have either a payroll expert in my business, or I would have suggested to outsource it to somebody that is an expert. I believe and some people, some of the simpler things, if you've got one director payroll and, the accountant's done the tax plan and they said, this is how much they're getting paid every month. Yes, of course, you can run this maybe in Xero, maybe in a payroll software, but that's up to you. Again, you get to choose. For me, I didn't touch any of that because I was focusing on management accounts and cash flow, which is other things that you can offer. So really understand, is this something that I'm interested? Am I willing to keep up to date and learn every time there's a budget, every time there's something changing, every time, HMRC release something or holiday entitlement changes or, there's some kind of case law? Are you that interested enough to really understand this so that you can give a really good service? If you are, absolutely great. If not, find someone you can outsource it to. You'll still make a profit. You can still charge more than what you're getting charged because that's how it works, and it works really well, and that always happened for me. But for us as bookkeepers, what we do need to deal with is when the payroll has been completed and run, we need to create a payroll journal to ensure that the element of cost and the liability of the tax and national insurance is all represented in that chart of accounts, that the expenses and the liabilities are all there ready so that when we produce a report, it is correct. So what usually happens is people see the money coming out of the bank account. So they pay that and that goes to one account, but that doesn't actually deal with the expense. So many times you'll see when your clients have, I've done this myself, the bank reconciles, but they've only done one element. And this is why you need a bookkeeper in your business.
Yeah, it's the grossing up part, isn't it? I mean, I sometimes think as well, like charts of accounts, so that the coding structure that says the codes beginning with 1 are sales codes, for example. Those charts of accounts sometimes as default aren't very clear as to what that code is for, particularly if you don't understand the difference between a profit and loss account and a balance sheet. And that's understandable. So plenty of times I've seen people code something to I don't know, what looks like a payroll code, but really it's a liability account because it's an amount that has to be paid in the future or something.
Absolutely. And this is, that's it. We have the income and expenses, but there are other the codes is whether it's going on the profit and loss, whether it's going on the, so you might think, it's coming out. It sounds like something that's an expense, but actually it's going to a liability account and it's not hitting your profit and loss. And then the reporting's wrong.
Yeah. Let's talk about reporting then. So there is a duty of every business to prepare financial statements and to pay tax. Mm-hmm. So there is a reason for compliance that we need to be preparing reports. Mm-hmm. But as in the moment, as you're working through the year in business, you also need to understand what's happening with your business so you can make decisions. You need to know as a business owner which items you're selling are actually profitable and worth your while, worth your time. You need to see if your costs are creeping up and you maybe need to review your pricing. You need to know if, you're spending too much on team members or you're not getting the return on investment on that team member. You need to know things like if you're up to date with your liabilities. And there's so much information you need. And there will be for... I hope most business owners are thinking about 1 or 2 KPIs every now and again. For us, I'm always if we sell nothing else, when do we run out of money? That's a KPI for me. I think most people wonder what their sales were this month. Yeah. But there are some things they are measuring that we as bookkeepers can give them the information for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're such a strategic partner in running a business and so underrated, because what I think the story, in the past was that the bookkeeper might keep all of this information and not really tell anyone anything. And the business owner was doing bank balance, accounting, really going, we've got some money in the bank. And then they'd wait for the accountant to bring all of these reports together a few months or even later after the year end and tell them about all this historical information and what profit they made. Whereas now, because of the cloud accounting and because of the software that's at our fingertips, we can be the ones that are keeping up the finger on the pulse of the business and saying, this is what's happening now. You don't have to wait for the compliance side of things. And that final report, actually, by the time you get last year's accounts, it's out of date. And yes, you can reflect on it and see and compare what you've done to other years, but you should already know all of that if you've got a good bookkeeper.
Yeah, and I think things like the cash flow and staying on top of it, if you're just looking at your bank balance again, looks all right, maybe I'll pay myself some more this month. That's not great decision making. That hasn't factored in all the things like the suppliers you need to pay in the next 60 days, or the one that's due next week, or the payroll that's coming up, or the VAT bill that can be such a surprise,
or the corporation tax bill.
Yeah.
Or actually there wasn't enough profit for you to take, and you've taken these dividends, and now you've got an overdrawn director's loan account, and you've got to figure out how you're going to pay that back. These are the kind of things that bookkeepers can do, and it's well within their remit, but sometimes they don't want to step on anyone's toes. They assume that the business, I always did, I just assumed that the business owner knew more than me because they're a business owner. I'm like, surely you haven't got this far without knowing all of this. I had a moment at one point when I walked into an office. It was a beautiful office. I had my own area. It was a massive room. I had my own computer set up. Obviously, it was desktop software back at the time, so I had to go there every week. And he said, can you come in? Can we have a meeting? I was like, yeah. He said, I've done this. I think it's a cash flow. And it was literally on the back of a fag packet. And I was looking at it like, what is that? And then we was trying to work it out. And I was like, I can help you with this. I could do this. But I just assumed that he would know how to do it.
But we can't because business owners don't start businesses because they love the analysis. They start it because they have a thing they think they can sell.
Yes.
They've seen an opportunity, they're going to make money out of it. And we need to make sure that they're reporting that money correctly, that it's working out for them. We can help them make more profit. If we were to say, do you know the profit margin on this is really being squeezed because of XYZ?
Yeah.
Let's help you with that.
Yeah. Or do you know that this item that you're creating, you're actually making a loss on? If you stopped making that, you'd make more money.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So there's lots of reporting we can share. I think things like being able to set up a cash flow forecasting tool and show the client, like give the client read-only access, for example, and then be able to have a conversation with them. Like, this is the kind of stuff that can make your meetings really valuable. And I think we should be thinking about having meetings with our client every month or every quarter, depending on what the agreement is.
Yeah. And I think these kind of things, when we start out, we worry that, do I have the knowledge? Do I understand this enough? But if you've ever done a household budget and thought, what do I think's coming in and what do I think's going out? That's all a cash flow forecast is.
Yeah.
So if you can, and it's not your job to create it, your job is to facilitate the time to sit down with the business owner and say, what do you think is coming in? And this is the evidence I've got from like the last 3 months' bank statements. And these are your usual direct debits. What do you think is going to go out? That's all it is.
So to wrap up then, for someone who's watching this, who's been thinking, what does a bookkeeper actually do? What we're talking about is setting the client up with some accounting software, making sure that their bank feed is live in the software so you can see at any time where you are with things, and that bank balance agrees to what's actually in the bank. Like,
yes.
Is the software the same as the bank? Make sure that we're recording sales appropriately, that we're slicing and dicing those numbers so the client can see information that's useful for them. We're recording expenses of the business so we can calculate profits, whether that's like a gross profit figure, so we can see how much money we're making off a particular product line, or whether it's net profit, so we can see how profitable the business is and what the director might be able to pay themselves. But also so we can work out taxes.
Yes.
We are posting adjustments when we know that there's a transaction that belongs in a different period than when it was actually paid.
Yeah.
We are doing some credit control. We're helping the client with payment runs. We're helping the client understand what their cash flow looks like in the future. And we're doing the compliance part of filing accounts and potentially VAT returns and self-assessment or corporation tax, and speaking to the client about all of that.
Absolutely. And as well, just keeping an eye and making sure that everything is tickety-boo. There's no fraud going on, and reporting on that as well, and making sure that we know our clients and have done risk assessments. And yeah, I mean, it's a job, so when people say, oh, I'm just a bookkeeper, I think we've helped to understand that there is a lot to it, and it's a great career and very fulfilling.
So this has been quite a different episode to the episodes that we have shared so far. But if you found this useful, if you'd like to see more videos like this, leave us a comment underneath this video. We'll see you next time.